I think we have the majority of people joining us today, and I think we'll get started here. Still have a few more people jumping in. So welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining us today for our second Freshwater Leaders Learning Session. Today we will be talking about flood management, and we have three great presenters with us today. So if you just jumped on, please in the chat let us know who you are and where you're from, so we can see who we have joining us across Canada. And I just wanted to say that my name is Leah Adams-Shute, and I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Sechelt Nation on the Sunshine Coast. And I'll just be moderating today's session, and a couple housekeeping items. Just please stay on mute if you're not speaking. We will be recording this session, so you will see that we've begun recording already. And that's so we can share this kind of wider and beyond to more people who didn't get to join us today. And so we will go through each speaker today, and then we will have a Q&A session after each speaker has given their presentation. So if you have any questions, just save those to the end, and please raise your hand or type the question in the chat, and each of the speakers can answer those for us. A few more people keep coming in. So I'm just going to move on to our agenda for today. So as I said, we do have three speakers joining us. So we have Steve Litke from the Lower Fraser River, then Fraser Basin Council, discussing the Lower Fraser River flooding and flood management. We have Don Fox joining us from New Brunswick Environment and Local Government, who will discuss the New Brunswick flood map. And last, we have Steve Strang from the Red River Basin Council, who will be discussing the Red River flood map with LiDAR. So we're looking forward to all of these presentations. And I'm just going to begin by introducing our first speaker, so Steve Litke. He has worked at the Fraser Basin Council since 1998 and is responsible for coordinating and facilitating the development of the Lower Mainland flood management strategy to reduce flood risk and improve resilience across BC's Lower Mainland. In this capacity, Steve and the FBC Flood Program team facilitate multi-interest flood planning committees, organize and facilitate engagement workshops, and coordinate the development of tools to support local and regional flood planning. Steve Litke graduated from Simon Fraser University with a master's degree in resource and environmental management. And he'll be speaking to us today about the Lower Fraser River flood mapping and flood management. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve, and he'll begin his presentation.
Thanks very much, Leah. I appreciate the invitation to be with you all today and talk flood. As Leah said, I'm Steve Litke with the Fraser Basin Council, and while the presentation will focus on flooding issues, I thought I'd give you just a short introduction to the Fraser Basin Council, the organization that I work for. FBC is a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization with a mission and a mandate to advance sustainability across BC. We have a board of 38 directors that are quite diverse, representing different aspects of different orders of government, different aspects of society. Our roles are typically as an educator on sustainability, and in many cases, we serve as an impartial convener and facilitator to bring together different interests, different disciplines, different jurisdictions for inclusive dialogue to help resolve complex issues, especially issues where there is no single agency responsible. And flood management it certainly falls under that characterization. Before I get into the flood content, I just wanted to orient you with the Fraser River and the Fraser River Basin. This map of British Columbia shows the river basin. And I know many of you are here in your sort of affiliation with the Canadian Heritage Rivers system, and the Fraser was designated, or the main stem of the Fraser was designated in 1998. Yeah, so it covers about a quarter of British Columbia, very diverse ecologically, socially, culturally, economically. And it comes with a diversity of flood hazards. BC has a lot of natural hazards because of the terrain and the climate and numerous flood hazards. And on the lower Fraser, we're concerned primarily with spring freshet as a result of snowmelt, as well as coastal storm surge. And we're also concerned about the impacts of climate change on both of those. And in the fall, we had some really significant atmospheric rivers. So I'll be touching on some of the sort of observations and consequences associated with those. But first, maybe just a quick slide on flood risk. There's really three different components that we're concerned with. There's the hazard, where does the water go, how fast is it flowing, how deep is it? Then there's the exposure, who and what assets are exposed to those flood hazards. And then there's the vulnerability, and what is the inherent vulnerability or susceptibility of damage or other kinds of adverse impacts to those things that are exposed to flood hazards. And each of these is dynamic. With respect to climate change, we anticipate for many flood hazards in BC a growing and increasing flood hazard in the future, larger and more frequent floods. So it's especially important that we concentrate efforts on reducing exposure over time and reducing vulnerability over time by focusing development away from flood-prone areas and building in and designing in resilience when there is development or infrastructure or assets that are in flood areas. I won't belabor this, but generally it's recommended to take an integrated approach to flood hazard management that's grounded in the specific local and regional context and circumstances. And really the foundation of that is good hazard and risk information. And then there's a number of different kinds of measures that can be undertaken. So floodplain management in terms of managing our growth and development and community settlement as it relates to flood areas, concentrating land uses that maybe are more resilient and or resistant to flood consequences. And trying our best to keep those high value assets that are highly vulnerable to flood damages out of flood prone areas. Flood mitigation infrastructure is a significant piece, especially along the lower Fraser. There's 600 kilometers of flood protection diking systems along the lower Fraser and the associated sea dikes. So flood infrastructure is a key piece. And then, of course, floods are inevitable. They're natural processes, so we also need to have good capacity and resources for emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And then more recently, there's a growing interest and exploration around how can nature-based solutions be part of the equation so we can advance positive environmental benefits, social benefits and outcomes in addition to effective flood mitigation. So getting back to FBC's role, we play that facilitation role, bringing together different interests and jurisdictions, in this case to facilitate the development of a lower mainland flood management strategy. And then there are other roles related to that. So a key piece has been to help.
We don't do anything for county employees, so don't ask.
Okay, no, it's more for you guys.
Can you,
Okay.
whoever's, please mute yourself if you are not done so yet.
Thanks, Leah. So yeah, to improve our understanding of flood hazard and risk, to inform those mitigation plans and ultimately decisions around infrastructure and policies and plans. And then there is also an important education role, not to raise awareness among the public so they're aware of the significance of this issue, but also education to inform decision making at different levels and in different orders of government. And a key piece of this work is also to help connect different professionals, practitioners, and policymakers across different jurisdictions, across different disciplines, different sectors. This is one map. I know mapping is going to be a focus of the other presentations, so I'm not going to focus on that, but this is one map that is a simulation of the 500-year Fraser River spring freshet projected out to the year 2100. So there's a higher peak flow on the Fraser because of the anticipation of a faster rate of snowmelt and more likely to have heavy rain during the spring. and then a meter of sea level rise at the downstream boundary. And what this shows, not surprisingly, is a flood of that magnitude would overtop the majority of the existing dikes because they were never designed or constructed for that magnitude of flood. So we've got some work to do. This would impact many of the communities in the region. And of course, what we also learned from the atmospheric rivers is those regional interdependencies. And I guess one thing I'll just highlight, because we're going to loop back to this, if you can see my cursor, this patch of purple down here is the Sumas Prairie area, where the flooding on the Nooksack River in the United States overflowed its banks and then spilled into the Sumas watershed and flowed north into Canada. So we'll come back to that. On the education side, just looping back to that, this is another piece of work that was developed as part of the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy. Floodwise.ca was developed as a first stop for flood-related information, for updates on the flood strategy, but also general information about hazard, risk reduction measures, maps, some of the history, and a number of different tools and information resources. So I'm going to turn now to the atmospheric rivers. There was a series of 3 atmospheric rivers between mid-November and early December, and quite extensive in terms of the geographic impacts, starting on Vancouver Island, then hitting the mainland, especially the lower Fraser area around Abbotsford, and then carrying on into the interior of the southwest of the province, flooding Merritt, Princeton, Spence's Bridge. And in addition to some of the larger rivers that were overwhelmed by that intense rainfall, a lot of local creeks and streams were flooded, and there were a number of landslides and highway washouts. And that was a period where all of the land transportation between this part of BC and the rest of Canada were disrupted for a short period of time. Here's an image looking across Sumas Prairie. It used to be a lake, and it did return to that state for a short period of time. In terms of consequences, very diverse, significant, and widespread. First, the people, an estimated 42 First Nations were impacted by these flood events. There were a couple cases where there was loss of life related to landslides. And many people evacuated, and a lot of social, mental, and emotional hardship that went with that experience and likely still be experienced to this day. A lot of anxiety, especially when heavy rains are forecast again. And yeah, a lot of evacuation required and emergency services. Really devastating impacts on critical infrastructure, especially the transportation networks, highways, rail lines. And a lot of impact on agriculture as well. Sumas Prairie is probably some of the most productive agricultural lands in the continent, and very intensive agricultural operations, and a lot of impact in terms of those operations, livestock, blueberry crops, etc. And then those indirect, a lot of economic impacts, both direct flood damages, but also indirect losses, and another layer impacting supply chain issues. And while the impacts to the environment haven't been well quantified, there's a lot of concern around the mobilization of pollutants in floodwaters and the subsequent contamination of soil and water and habitats. This is that zoom into the Sumas Prairie area, and you can see that the Sumas watershed drains from southwest to northeast, and when the Nooksack overflows its banks, it comes into the Sumas River and starts to head towards the lowlands, the former lake bottom. This orange line is a dike that was built following the drainage of the lake around the turn of the century, and that was designed to keep the Sumas River out of Sumas Lake so it wouldn't refill. And then those waters drain north and into the Fraser through a pump station. And I guess the other thing I'd mention in terms of the context here is that much of this land is agricultural land reserve, and that has been beneficial in terms of limiting the urban growth and development in this area. There's been quite an intensification of agriculture, so the consequences were still significant, but it wasn't a densely populated area. And I guess the last thing I'd mention is that this was and is a known flood hazard for the area. Sumas can flood both from the Fraser, which is this water body in the north, from the Chilliwack Vetter system, which is on the eastern boundary, and then also from the Nooksack coming from the south. And I should say, this is not a simulation of the atmospheric river floods. This is a zoom in to a simulation of a Fraser River freshet flood of record and a simulated dike breach on this dike here. And this is a photograph of the Sumas area in 1990 when the Nooksack last flooded. And this is, the next image is from the same location. This is looking west from the overpass. And this image here is looking east towards that same overpass. And with that, I'll just introduce my other team members here, Frances Wu and Jenny Koss, who are on the session today. And yeah, I look forward to the other presentations and any time for questions and discussion. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Steve, so much for that wonderful presentation. At this time, if anyone has any questions for Steve, we can go through those now. Either raise your hand or type the question into the chat. Give you a second to think about that. Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. That was wonderful. If no one has any questions, we will move on to Don Fox, who is our next presenter. He's the Director of Air and Water Science from New Brunswick Environment and Local Government. And I'll hand it over to you, Don. And if you do have any questions or they come up as people are going through, you can also hold them to the end and we'll give another chance to ask questions. Maybe you're just a little shy right now, but over to you, Don.
Thank you very much. And I just want to confirm, if you can give me a thumbs up or something, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
The full presentation, not just the animated. No, it's the full screen.
You bet.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to present to such a wide audience all across Canada. This is great. To put the presentation in perspective here, I just want to say a few words. New Brunswick had flood hazard maps online and made available to the public for many years. And a fair amount of them were way out of date. Some of them were up to 30 years out of date. So I'm going to say it was about 4 years ago, we started on a program to update the existing flood hazard maps for the province. Today, I'm going to try to focus on the St. John River Basin, but some of my slides are province-wide as well. In addition to that, so once we got the maps finished, it then became a whole task in itself as to get them out to the public and make them available. And that was as much work as actually producing the maps in the first place. This presentation that I'm going to give here, for one thing, it's very short. I think it's 12 slides. It has been given multiple times, and it was given mostly by my water resource specialist, Jasmine Boisvert, who developed the maps in partnership with others. And Jasmine has recently left the department. Otherwise, I would have asked him to give the presentation. So I'm going to give it at a bit of a higher level. Jasmine certainly was a hydrologic engineer, and I am not. So I'm going to assume most people are not hydrologists, and I won't get into that level of detail for sure. You will notice my slides, because we did these internally to targeted audiences gearing up to making the maps available to the public before Christmas. We did that. And then just in early January of this year, we made them available to the public. So this exact presentation was given, I'm going to say, many times. The slides are bilingual. If you choose the language of your choice and focus on that section, you'll find the slides won't be as busy. Otherwise, they can look very busy slides. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try if I can juggle my screens properly. You'll see my head bopping back and forth here. I have 3 screens. I'm going to give the presentation, the short one. And then after that, I want to go to our web page and share another screen and just go through what it took to make the maps available. I think that's important as well. And I would like to show you the viewer. So assuming that I can open and close a few things and share my screen properly, we'll get right to it. So yeah, I'm going to talk about flooding in New Brunswick, a little bit about flooding under a climate change scenario. Basically, what are flood hazard maps? Why are they important? And as I said, I'd like to not dwell on it, but I'd like to open up the map viewer itself and just show it. It is online, available to the public, and yeah, I'd like to do that at the end. Maybe a little bit of context here for the river. Now, I just chose some statistics here out of off the internet. The St. John River Basin, basically, if you can follow my cursor, starts over here in the green, which is Maine, goes north and takes a somewhat circular pattern, comes down here. This is the border between the state of Maine and the province of New Brunswick. This is the St. John River coming down through here. The city of Fredericton is roughly in this area. And then the St. John River comes down, heading south and comes out into the Bay of Fundy here. And this is the city of St. John in this area. For context, it's about a 1-hour drive between Fredericton and St. John. The river is over 600 kilometers long. The basin itself is about 55,000 square kilometers, and 20,000 square kilometers of that basin is in the state of Maine. So it's an international river. At one time, it had an active international joint commission group many years ago. And so in terms of the size of rivers in Eastern Canada, it's a major river. For Canada in general, perhaps not so large, but for this area, it certainly is a large system. My last comment here, my second last comment on this map, the upper basin in this entire area is a mountainous region. So there's a fair amount of profile on the river as it comes south here. And in terms of dams, hydroelectric dams, there are several along the river, and they are in the, I'm going to say, mid to upper basin areas. When you get to Fredericton in this area down through to St. John, it's a very flat area. So all that to mean, in terms of flooding, in this mid to upper basin, a lot of the flooding that we deal with is related to ice jams, simply because of the profile of the basin. There are some major tributaries coming into the river in this area. And so the major floods that we see up here are ice jam related. In the lower basin, the major floods we see are overland flooding, simply because the basin, there's too much water coming down. And so we get that type of flooding. And this map, yes, it is province-wide. I would point to the third type of flooding that we do get in New Brunswick, and that is related to storm surge along the coasts. And as I will show you some examples of the maps, we do have a lot of the coastal area covered, but again, I want to kind of stick to the St. John River Basin. So that's a little bit of context in terms of the river itself. A little bit of climate change related information here. Coastal flooding is a combination of tides, storm surges, sea level rise. That's in terms of coastal. And this graph just shows that between the year 2000 and 2100, for New Brunswick, we're looking at a sea level rise of about 100 centimeters. So we need to really, it's significant. In addition to taking that into consideration with storm surges, it's a significant thing to take into consideration. Inland floods, as I've said, mostly caused by rain, snow melt, and ice jamming. Climate change is expected to increase average temperatures by about 5 degrees Celsius by year 2100. So we're looking at more intense storms. And this overall impact prediction is it could result in approximately 20% higher peak flows by 2100. So, climate change is bringing a different world as it is everywhere. So what are flood hazard maps? They identify areas that are at risk of flooding and how often it's likely to occur. And that concept here, I just want to dwell on it a little bit. When I show you the viewer, the flood hazard mapping viewer, you're going to see different colors. And in this example here, you can obviously pick out infrastructure here, buildings, roadways. This light blue is intended to be water, right? That's flooded the area. And when you go into the viewer, you're basically going to click on an area in that light blue and you're going to get a water level. So the flood hazard maps are basically a water level and basically the likelihood that they're able to occur in a certain period of time. And the idea is that if we know where floods are going to occur, we can at least prepare for it. And for the people that are already in those flood areas, we can come up with some ways to help as well. The maps that we have produced are basically four different magnitudes and frequencies. They are the 5% AEP, annual exceedance probability maps. One of them in at present day and one of them out to year 2100, and the 1% AEP map, same deal, present day and out to 2100. So there's four different layers. I'll talk a little bit more about AEP, but basically the 5% AEP, the older terminology would be 1 in 20 year return period. And the 1% AEP layer would be the 1 in 100 year flood or 1 in 100 year return period. These will help people make decisions to reduce flood related risks to life and property, as we've already seen what happened to BC in the previous presentation, which was phenomenal flooding, actually. Quite frightening in terms of the water levels that hit British Columbia this past year. And they'll be able to inform decisions as to locations and new building designs, new roads, etc. And again, I can't forget the point that because we hear it when we present these this mapping to the public. Sure, it's great to be able to use them to plan for the future, but a lot of people put up their hand and say, well, excuse me, we're already here. So what do you have to offer? So I don't want to lose sight of that. And we have endeavored on some aspects to help with flood-proofing properties, etc. So all that to say that we've recently completed, updated, and expanded flood hazard mapping for the coast and some rivers. This map of the province of New Brunswick, all the blue areas are areas that are covered with the new mapping. So you can see a lot of the coast and a lot of inland areas. And as I've said, from Fredericton north in the mid to upper basin in this area, there's not a lot of flood hazard mapping there right now because it's prone mostly to ice jam flooding. That is significant and it is very important, but we just don't have the information to be able to produce flood hazard predictions, flood hazard maps at this time. And that has certainly been pointed out to us that, you know, this is an area of significant flooding and we do realize that. So I guess this is a little bit of a repeat, but the annual exceedance probability, it's the chance of a flood occurring in any given year, and we've got four new map layers, the 5% AEP layer and the 1% AEP, the older terminology, 1 in 100 year return period, 1 in 20 and 1 in 100, and then both of those done over again with some climate change predictions out to year 2100. So, and I will show you a demo here if I don't run out of time, and those layers, it's all in a nice online viewer, so we're very happy about that. And so the maps show the potential effects of riverine and coastal flooding. A couple of things they do not do. The mapping that we've done, we don't have detailed city or town municipal infrastructure mapped, integrated to these. So for example, if there's ditches or berms or culverts or any of these things that change the flow, that is not really included in these flood hazard maps. These are much larger scale mapping and we don't have that type of detail. And well, again, repeat myself, they don't consider ice jamming. We are trying to make some progress on ice jam areas and what we can do about that. So yeah, so we have an online viewer. It's been created to visualize the maps. It's now available to the public. For those, I do see a couple of local folks here. For those people in New Brunswick, we're well familiar with what GONB is, but it's basically New Brunswick's online information portal where all things related to mapping can be found. So they are available there. And I do want to jump into this web page, but another whole side of this project was to develop a website, and I do want to jump off to that right now. I see that it's question time here. I think that's the end of this presentation, but if you bear with me, if I can, let's see. Can somebody confirm now that I've switched to sharing and you can now see our webpage, Flooding in New Brunswick?
Yep, you can see it, Don.
Perfect. So that's a little bit about the flood hazard maps, a little bit of an introductory presentation. As part of that, it became as much of a program in itself to get permission from government to release them, get prepared for the release, prepare information, prepare web pages, and all these things. And there was a lot of work, as much work putting into this educational piece as there was to develop the maps themselves. I'm going to scroll down through this and hopefully won't go too fast. Otherwise, I may make some people seasick here. But there are online videos on the web page. And as I scroll down, there's some information on flood hazard mapping in New Brunswick. And there is a tutorial about how to use the viewer itself. There are several other tutorials and videos on the web page. This is the page here. I'll come back to this in a minute and I'll open up the maps, but this is the map viewer itself with the 4 layers that I've indicated. But we've also had to kind of consider everything related to flooding and go back and make sure all of the information was available. So we have an older section here where the older flood hazard maps are still available. We're debating now whether to take those older maps down or still keep them available. I'm not sure about that at this stage. If I get maybe 2 minutes, I'd love to show our Riverwatch mobile viewer and talk a little bit about flood forecasting. But perhaps that's a little bit of a different topic. As I scroll down through here, there's more videos. There's some information on flood proofing, flood resilience, and flood risk reduction strategy for New Brunswick, etc. I'm going to stop there on our webpage and go back to the viewer. But this was, again, as important or even more important than the maps themselves. Trying to give people context and information they need to that goes along with the maps. So if I can open up the viewer itself, it has a look and feel of most geographic based viewers these days. It's based on Esri GIS products. When you open it up, you start with the map of the province of New Brunswick, and basically a lot of the information I just presented to you is given on the right hand side here in terms of information. But let's go right to the layers themselves and let me zoom in on an area. I'm really not going to dwell on the viewer too much here, but I would like to just show examples. We can go right into Fredericton, and there is the present day 1 in 20 year 5% annual exceedance probability flood levels right there. And now if I can find, I want to change my mapping view. I believe it's here, my base gallery. I like the overhead imaging a little better myself. And if I can go back now, I would like to find the building. Yes. Oh, the building's automatically on anyway. So this is great in terms of, well, let me put on a higher level flood here. Level 2100 out to 1 in 100 year. Goodness grief, that's pink. It should be blue for water, but anyway, you take the point. That's water levels, and the buildings are there and the building footprints are there. One of the next steps for us is to work on a 3D layer where we can alternate the view of this and get a perspective as to how high up the water is on the building. Right now, it looks like the water is completely covering some of those buildings. That's not factual. The water is surrounding the buildings. When you do click on an area, a box window will open up and it will show you the ground level and the water level. And maybe that's a little bit more detail that I want to get into right now. But let me, one more thing I wanted to do. Let me close that. And I can't help myself, but I want to go to the Riverwatch mobile. Part of my group in environment and local government, I have the hydrology center in my group, and we have just gotten over what we call our Riverwatch program, which is flood season on the St. John River Basin. And as part of that Riverwatch program with Emergency Measures Organization, we do flood forecasting. We eventually get to 7 days a week, but for the most part, through the flood season, we do forecasting 5 days a week. So every morning we put out a new flood forecast. The program's over now. We had a very good season in terms of not much flooding at all, but this is a little app viewer that was designed to basically visualize our flood forecasts. So if I can go to the Fredericton gauge here, and that brings up a graph of Fredericton. So it will show the water levels in dark blue over a period of time, May 5th to May 9th. And then the light blue is the water levels that our flood forecaster would predict for the next 5 days out. And you can click on any one of our gauges along that river and see our 5-day forecast. I love this little viewer, and it's extremely well used through the flood forecast season. And honestly, that is exactly everything I wanted to say. And I was able to share my screen properly. And yeah, thank you very much. And I'll take any questions.
Great, thank you, Don. That was a wonderful presentation. Your screens all worked, and thank you for sharing so much information with us. Are there any questions from the participants here for Don?
Hi, Don. It's Mark Johnson with the Rivers Program. Thanks for the presentation. You kind of answered the question I was going to ask right at the end, but I'm curious to know how well the maps have been received and used by the public and the app. And you were speaking at the end about how the app is used quite significantly throughout the flood season. But I'm curious to know, like, does the public know these exist, and are they using them?
They do, and I believe that we have as much work ahead of us as we have in the past. So what's going on now is we made it a point that we wanted to update our existing out-of-date maps, and we wanted to get these out to the public, and that's how we pitched it to government. And we did not make it into a regulation or make it regulatory in any way. And so what that means is a lot of entities like local governments, cities, towns, etc., are now looking at these and they're saying, okay, how should we use these? So they're asking for input from the province, like what do you recommend? And we're basically, our intent was to allow the decisions to be made at the local level in local planning, local regional planning, that type of thing. In terms of which layer they want to use, how they want to move forward in terms of buildings in the future. So where we are now is we are working through that. We are helping, we are offering advice, but we are not demanding and saying, do this, do that in a regulatory fashion. If that answers your question, but they are taking off. Right now, New Brunswick is in a very, this is another presentation altogether, but local governance in New Brunswick now is a very hot topic. And we've gone through a year of local governance reform that is probably more extensive than any reform we've gone through in recent years, for sure. And so there's a lot of local governance reform going on, but lots of local planning. And so the web page itself and the maps are really taking off. And yeah, we're just working through that now. So yeah, good question. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Dwight. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Don, for your presentation. Very, very good work being done. I take it your regulatory flood level or outer limit of your floodplain is based on flood frequency. A little bit different here in Ontario. We have regulatory floods based on historical storms. So I'm trying to understand in your projection for future climate, was that based on climate inputs or how you did the projections for future levels under climate change?
Yeah, I can give you the high level answer to that. And I would say that in terms of the details of the modeling, it was done by my water resource specialist, and certainly we could find more details on that. But just in terms of, for example, the inland flood maps, for all the areas, we were fortunate enough to have already developed HEC-RAS 2D models for a lot of the areas, simply because we've been doing flood forecasting for 50 years on the St. John River Basin, right? So as part of doing flood forecasting every year, we have needed to develop models. So we had HEC-RAS 2D models for all the areas that we developed the flood hazard maps. So they were developed through a modeling exercise using the existing models we had developed and what we could project from climate change. For example, increased temperature, increased precip, those types of inputs. I think that generally answers your question.
Yes, thanks very much. Supplemental question I've got is you've developed a nice website for presenting the maps to the public. I know the federal government, through some of the MD&P program, is creating a portal for floodplain maps, and I'm just wondering how that's going to get coordinated so that they're getting the latest maps or going to pointed to the latest maps if you're updating them.
Yeah, again, another great question. I didn't point out our funding agencies and our partners. Was a deficiency in my presentation here, but this work was done in partnership with the federal government. It was matching dollars. And so we're committed to passing over everything we have in terms of the layers so that they can at least archive them. But how they're presented to the public, I'm a little bit unsure right now. They could perhaps, if they wanted to develop their own web page, point to the New Brunswick's web page and say, here, if you want to look at that, go to this web page. But certainly we're committed to passing all that information over so that they can archive it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. And, you know, I guess the concern is making sure when the public is looking at information, they're looking at the most updated information. So
I know
keeping data in sync is a challenge.
Yeah, you know what, I can't help myself again. I know I'm a little bit over time here. I'm going to be quiet, but on that note, this became a little bit of a nightmare for us when we developed the online web page, because there are so many legacy links to older and test cases and things that are still there. I'm fearful that people can find the old and not the new, right? And so that is a little bit of a problem for us right now. So.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, good.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Don. Thanks for taking those questions. If there aren't any more questions, I'll just wait a second. I don't see any more hands. We will move on to our next speaker. So thanks again, Don. And our next speaker is Steve Strang, and he's the managing director at the Red River Basin Council. He has a passion for his family and the environment, and his work at the Red River Basin Council is focused on water management and water quality issues facing the Red River Basin, both in the US and in Manitoba. And he believes our future generations will reflect on this time as being the tipping point of action or non-action as it relates to climate change. And I will turn it over to you, Steve, to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Do I get an invite here? Or do I have to open the share tray?
You will have to, yeah, you can choose the option to share your screen.
Did that come up?
It's not showing yet.
Well, it's not very good, is it?
Okay.
I'm used to the go-to meeting where we just get an invite to share.
Okay. In the top portion of your screen, there should be a share screen option.
Top portion of my screen.
And if you can't find that, I can also
I
share it
can,
for you.
let's see here.
Kind of looks like an arrow pointing upward.
Yeah, I think I figured it out.
Okay. Perfect.
What do you, there we go. Okay. You can see that now?
We can.
Sorry about that. I guess I'm a little bit technology challenged at times. Want to thank you for inviting me out. First of all, I want to say I really appreciated Don's presentation. A couple of reasons. I'm actually from Nova Scotia, so I love the accent. Certainly nice to see all the mapping because I don't get to view that too often. But yeah, a lot of the problems that they're dealing with in New Brunswick are similar to what we've been dealing with here. So as Leah said, my name is Steve Strang. I'm the managing director for the Red River Basin Commission. I've been with the Basin Commission for 7 years. Prior to that, I was actually in politics. Yes, lovely job of politics. I was a mayor for one of the capital region municipalities, and we are actually located along the Red River, where we developed the ice breaking program that you might have heard about on the Red River that happens every year. So my introduction today, actually, before I get started, I just want to recognize that we sit on Territory 1 land, certainly home of the Anishinaabe and the Métis Nations. And I do that because we do a lot of work with First Nations and they're great partners with us. So I do want to recognize that. So our area, well, first of all, we're in Manitoba. And the Red River Basin is an international basin, and we're located just to the southern border. And the Red River itself actually empties into Lake Winnipeg, but it originates out of Minnesota through the areas of the Bois-de-Sioux and the Otter Tail Rivers, which kind of start the river off. And as it travels north, it is part of the divide between Fargo and Grand Forks as it heads up through North Dakota, then into Manitoba, through the city of Winnipeg, which actually some of it is bypassed through the Red River floodway, and then it empties itself into the Netley Creek and then into Lake Winnipeg. Our area here is mostly flat prairie land, and I think that's why we've been dealing with so much flooding in this region. Once we hit and overflow the borders, it just starts to spread out. And even as we're dealing with things today, I got a call to say that my own municipality is declaring a state of emergency. We're receiving another 80 plus millimeters of rain. It's actually pouring right now as I look out the window. And this will only add to the problems that we're dealing with. And we're seeing a lot of fluctuation. Actually, this year was the first time that we've seen a number of peaks within our river system. I'll go on to the next slide. So I think most of you know what LiDAR is, but LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It allows us to get very accurate elevation models or measurements, and it's simply done. I mean, there's a laser that is mounted on usually an aircraft where it sends down the laser beams through a scanner process, and then it's picked up back into the airplane, and it measures the time and the distance that that laser is reflected to the ground and come back, and it's able, with a proper software, tell us pretty well the lay of the land. And this is really important for us because as we continue to utilize LiDAR and we're continuing to develop it, there's been really a lot of software tools that come about, which allows us to sit at our seats of our desk and do configuration on whether, you know, infrastructure projects will work. So in the old days, when we used to send out the survey team, it would take a long time to get all the measurements. They weren't as precise. Well, actually, some of them were very precise, but not as fast. And with this technology, it's been a real benefit for the basin. But LiDAR has advanced quite a bit, and now LiDAR is being utilized in agriculture processes, biodynamics, you know, robots, meteorology, atmospheric studies, driverless cars, fingerprinting, and even recently, Apple through iPhone, the iPhone 12, I believe it has a bit of LiDAR technology in it where it's utilized to do measurements and some 3D scanning. So quite interesting. But what's so important for us here in the Red River is that we've been inundated with flooding. And as I said to you just a few seconds ago, we're dealing with flooding again, and it's been an occurrence. We've probably seen some of the worst flooding in the region, and there has been billions of dollars spent on a reactive type of situation where now with the technology coming in and being utilized, we're really trying to be reactive. We're trying to work with our watersheds to increase their capacity, to allow municipalities to better understand what they're facing and how they can address it. So, but there's a bit of a twist, and that twist is now we're all looking at climate change. So we may be looking at flood reduction through the idea of water retention. And then now we're looking at all the benefits that it could bring through nutrient reduction, maybe greenhouse gas reduction, carbon storage, infrastructure development, and so on and so forth. But, you know, when we all started, and some of you may recall the flood of '97, which we call the flood of the century, the United States started collecting data at that point, and they completed their data capture for the region in 2006. And just recently, we were able to catch up with them and have ours completed. So as I said earlier, here we are in spring of 2002. We have 24 municipalities, soon to be 25 from what I'm hearing, that have declared state of emergencies for this basin. And you can see some of the pictures. It's flat, it spreads out, and basically we have many of our fields, our roads, and a lot of our infrastructure gets covered, and it becomes a major lake where at times people can only get in and out of their residence through the utilization of watercraft. So it's very concerning, and it's getting out of that reactive state, like I said, and wanting to be able to get into a proactive state. And LiDAR gives us the tool to do that. Or LiDAR is the tool for us to do that. Over the years, we've had some major floods, and probably the worst was the one of 1826. And what we're dealing with here today in 2022 is similar to what we had in 2009, which would be about the fourth worst flood on record. And you can see from the picture to the right, this was this year, and this is in the town of Morris. And you can see what's happening. And there's probably going to be multi-million dollars of damages again this year, even though that there has been a lot of infrastructure and money spent based on community diking, individual diking, and even some regions, there's been a lot of buyouts. And all this has been done through the province of Manitoba, the federal government, and the municipalities participating. And even when I was the mayor of St. Clements, we did a major buyout of an area that was constantly being flooded out. So we try to mitigate it, but if we can't mitigate it, we want to buy it out, because we certainly don't want to continue to endanger the lives that are there. So what have we done so far? Well, in the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, as I said earlier, they've had that data, LiDAR data collected. And since I came into the basin and we were working with our watersheds, the first thing I asked, what do you need done? And from each and every one of them is that we need LiDAR data. We need to be able to have this tool so that we can really focus in on what needs to be completed in our regions in order to give us protection. And now with the way things are, it's just not only the municipalities, everybody is affected by the flooding. And even this year, they basically had to evacuate the entire Peguis First Nations community. And working with Chief Hudson, and I know Glenn very well, is that, you know, they're waiting to be able to utilize this. We've just gotten new coverage flown again up into their area. They want to be able to look at community dike, and they want to be able to prevent these huge costs and how it affects their community. And the only way to do that is to get the data, to be able to understand the use of the data. And because of that, what we've done is we actually, after we started working and obtained the data, we wanted to be able to train many of our municipalities that didn't have a LiDAR or had the skills to utilize the software that utilized the LiDAR data. So we actually did a video educational series for learners, which I'll give you the link later on, where if you're in a municipality and you don't understand what LiDAR is or how to utilize LiDAR or understand the information that perhaps your staff are putting in front of you, which is obtained through LiDAR data, then this gives you an opportunity to A, understand it, and to B, start getting hands-on, getting onto your computer and actually self-teaching yourself on the first steps. Now, this has been very useful. We have been giving open house presentations. We're going to be starting to actually do classes because now we're coming together as the threat of LiDAR is getting a little bit lighter, and we're hoping to be able to give teaching classes to everybody that's there on how to be able to take this information and utilize it in your own community. So as I said, we have 5 watersheds in the basin. Now they've all developed their watershed management plans. Most recently, the Red River Basin worked with all the watersheds in order to do climate adaptation plans, which will kind of fit into their water management plans or even the emergency plans of the communities. It's really important because now, as being an international body and we're looking at the big picture, we want to make sure that the infrastructure that's being developed is being put into the proper place. It's about getting the best bang for your buck, and whether that could be on the US side or it could be coming out of one of the watersheds, we can't be looking at about lines. Water has no boundaries, right? So we have to look at the best bang for buck type of thing and what is going to be the best protection for that watershed region. And that is how we are working with things on the value of LiDAR within Manitoba. So as I said earlier about climate change, and this is from our friends from the Prairie Climate Center. And as you can see from this map, and it shows a lot of redness on the bottom within Manitoba, which is on the right side. I think you can see my cursor, so it's right in here. This is the Red River Basin region. If we continue to see the climate change that we're seeing, we could be seeing up to 45 days of 30-degree weather. And during the summer, we're at a time we would maybe see an extreme of 5 or 6 days. This is a dramatic change. So what this brings for us as far as climate change is really wet, a lot of precipitation in the spring. But as we go into summer, we're going to develop drought. And we're seeing these 2 extremes all at once in 1 year. And then we need to understand how are we going to deal with that as we go forward. Key messages for the future. Much hotter summers. I didn't want this thing, I just wanted it to pop up. So let's see if I can get that running. So as I said, we're going to see much hotter summers. We're going to see different, everything coming together under one. And as we're seeing this really, this dry summers, we understand that this moisture, when it hits our agricultural fields, doesn't really get to spread out. It doesn't get to slowly go in. It's going to start hitting these crops and go directly into the ground. And these are the extremes that we're talking about here. And we have to be ready for it. We have to be able to utilize the proper tools to make it happen. So if you go online, and I'm going to try to just switch over, but if you go online, and I'm going to just back out of here. Can you see this page with YouTube?
Yep, we can see the link there.
Excellent. So if you follow this link, which is in my piece, you're able to go in, and we've actually developed 13 videos, some of them to address LiDAR and LiDAR changing, but the other ones is talking about building climate resilience and how do we adjust to climate change. And also, if you go onto the Red River Basin Commission site, which is this one here, it allows you to see the LiDAR update and allows you to switch into the LiDAR training module. And we have received funding to do this, and we're hoping that there will be the intermediate one coming very soon. So with that, I think I'm pretty well done. I really wanted to skim the top of it. I'm probably not the best techie person to get into details about LiDAR, but I certainly wanted you to understand the benefits that LiDAR can bring to your region, especially if you're dealing with some of the problems that we are here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Leah, and I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for that presentation. Very much appreciate it. Are there any questions for Steve from the crowd?
I'll just take that as I did a great job. And
yeah, perfect. And are there any questions in general from everyone here? Okay, we have one. Steve Litke, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Steve. Are you using LiDAR primarily to sort of set the maps, or are also you looking at sort of simulating different mitigation measures within some sort of model to see the effects of diking, floodway, diversion, those sorts of measures?
Yeah, it's both on that. I mean, first of all, we partnered with the province of Manitoba just due to the fact that we had to convince the province of the importance of LiDAR. And I think they knew that. It just, you know, it's that commitment of funding and what's the priorities. And this one just never seemed to fit into place. For us here at the Basin, we're really about creating the partnership. We're the people that bring the people together. But when you talk about the utilization of the LiDAR data under different software scenarios, that is being shared throughout. So we take that data and we make it available on the provincial website. People can have access to it no matter where you're from. And you can utilize it for different scenarios, different programs. You know, we've been approached by different types of organizations that were using it for like the driverless car technology. And I think it was someone reached out through Google or something like that. So a lot of different types of ideas that are coming out of it and different sources. So
thanks.
Great. And we have another question from Kyle. Go ahead, Kyle.
There we go. Thank you, Steve. That was a wonderful presentation. Actually, all three were wonderful presentations. And maybe not so much a question, just so much as an applause for the role of the basin in being a capacity multiplier, working with a small rural municipality here in Alberta, and sitting on our own version of the Basin Council, on the board thereof. A lot of these municipalities have a lot of interest, but they lack the technical knowledge and capacity. So I wanted to applaud you and the Basin for your work in expanding that and making these tools more accessible. Yeah, I don't know if maybe you could speak a little bit for 20 seconds about what you have found as being some challenges and opportunities as you approach some of these partners who may or may not be more or less willing, perhaps?
Yeah, I have to say that the Red River Basin's been around for 40 years. We sit with about 43 directors. They come from all different areas. We've been very fortunate. My background being a municipal mayor, I also sat on I chaired the Winnipeg Metro, the planning board. I had a lot of higher level titles where I've been able to build relationships with all our First Nations and friends, which has really helped carry that along. I've always believed that we prove ourselves by showing, the commitment of going first is, I think, big. And we've been very lucky, and I understand, the problems that you have within partnership, because we do receive that. But overall, I feel we've been really lucky. And some of the other things that we're doing, I'll just quickly hit on it, like the Netley Marsh renewal. If you get time, save netleymarsh.ca, a wonderful partnership about helping to turn around the Netley Marsh. Our One Basin, One Governance, which was really led by us partnering with our First Nations people. There's a website on that. We're just about to release a report regarding First Nations and their right for water governance, which I think a lot of folks in BC could relate to. Anybody in Canada could relate to. So I think it's really about leading by example, working with people and letting them understand that you're there to help them. And that's been our success.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Dwight.
Yes, thanks very much, Steve. Really good presentation. Absolutely echo what you said about the wide benefit of LiDAR. We're fortunate to, here in southwestern Ontario, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food completed topographic LiDAR for our area, and it's really provincially benefiting because there's so many uses for it, not just for floodplain mapping or hazard mapping. Question to you, I'm not sure whether your LiDAR also included any bathymetric LiDAR. We did do some work with bathymetric LiDAR, and it was kind of on the bleeding edge. So we're always interested if others have gained any experience with bathymetric LiDAR, which is the topography underneath the water.
Right, know it very well. Actually, with a lot of the work that we've done in the Netley, part of our licensing was required to do the bathymetry within the system. Unfortunately, the thing about the Red River, it's a beautiful water that is like the Mississippi, and it's silty, it's muddy, and it's cloudy. And the bathymetry actually had to be taken by putting the transducers on the vessels themselves and taking them into the marsh and on the Red River system. So, yeah, I wish we could have had that option. I think it would have saved us a lot of effort and a lot of time in the long run, but unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of success due to the makeup of the river.
Yeah, we had some success, but again, echo what your comment is. Typically, if you're getting into turbidity, that can be a limiting factor for the bathymetric LiDAR. Thanks very much. Great work.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just want to say the turbidity that we found, and sometimes the background turbidity, because we were actually dredging the Red River and utilizing the siltation to put it into the marsh to elevate the marsh bottom to create vegetation shelves. And the background turbidity, or the natural turbidity, has actually been higher than what it is in the river system. So it's quite dense at times.
Okay, thank you for all the wonderful questions. Are there any more questions from anyone here today? For Steve or for the other presenters as well? Okay, great. Well, this concludes our 3 speakers for today, and I would just like to extend a big thank you to Steve, and Dawn on behalf of the CHRS, as well as everyone who joined today for your wonderful presentations. I think they proved to be very informative for everyone here, and we'd like to thank everyone for joining today. We will have more Freshwater Leaders Learning Sessions from the CHRS coming up in the future. This is the second one we've done, and we will have recorded this and we'll put it out on our newsletter as well as on our website and share with people who weren't able to attend. So again, I just wanted to say thank you to our presenters, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day, afternoon, wherever they are in Canada. So thanks again.
Stay dry, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.